In this tutorial, we're going to get the player landing on a landing pad and being destroyed if they land unsuccessfully, and then we'll open up the lose UI in that case. Or if they land gracefully under the speed limit, then we will flash the winning UI. So let's start with the player object. We do need a new script for that. I'm just going to get in nice and close. Okay, make sure you're on the player object, not the art object. And let's add another FSM to the player. So anywhere in the gray area while having the player selected, right click, and we're going to add an FSM. And let's call this one like death. Remember, we can move back and forth between FSMs by this drop down. We want to be on death. We'll just call this it. Doesn't really need to do anything. And then we will right click and add a state. And let's create a event here called death. And then add a global transition to that one, death. So we're gonna just leave this here for now, but this is where we'll send an event when the player is no longer in the game. This will be that place where we send a message to. So let's create our landing pad now. Now I'm in close to the player because I want to create a landing pad that is similarly shaped, the right sort of relative size to the rocket. So I'm going to start with a game object cube. I'm still in 2D mode. I'm going to switch to 3D. And mine is conveniently located right next to the rocket. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. I'm going to keep it close by because I kind of want to just see the size of the rocket compared to that landing pad. And I'm going to use my scale tool and I'm going to increase it. Okay. It looks about the right sort of size I want for the challenge level. And you can make yours however big you like. It's really up to you. But I am going to make a couple more changes to mine. I want mine to be flatter, right? Now, my temptation is to move it far away and make a game out of it right away, but for testing purposes, I'm going to leave it relatively close to the rocket because I want to be able to test it without having to fly a whole long way. I'm going to rename cube to landing pad. All right, so let's take a look at the components on this one. See this box collider here? The box collider is currently set to 000 and size 111. It's perfectly uniform to the size of this object. And the way that we're going to set this script up is that we're going to use a collision volume. So when the player object collides with the collision of the landing pad, we're going to detect that and we're going to make something happen. We're going to check the speed, and then we're going to decide if it's successful or not. If it's going too fast, it'll blow the player up, and if it's just under the speed limit, then the player will successfully land on the pad. In order to do that, we need a special box collider. We've got this one, and we absolutely need it because we don't want the player to pass right through the mesh. So we need another box collider. All right, let's do that. So see where it says Add Component? Click on that. We want box collider. All right, now right now this is exactly, well, for some reason mine came in at 0.9999, right? This is exactly the same shape as the one above it, this box collider. But we don't want it to be exactly the same place. We want it to be slightly higher than the other object. So we're going to take this Y value on the center, the Y value being this direction, right? Make that 0.1. See how it slightly now is raised? That's important because we want it to be just slightly higher than the actual mesh the player will land on. And then the other important difference is that you check this box, is trigger. Okay? And so is trigger means don't collide with me, don't actually stop, right? It just sort of removes the physics layer of stopping the player And it's, like if you didn't hit this box, its trigger, the player would seem to be floating slightly above the landing pad. But when it's flagged as trigger, they will pass through that layer, but we'll use that as sort of as a trigger trip line, sort of to allow something to happen. But this particular box collider will keep the player from just passing through the mesh. We need another component. We need a rigid body. Rigid body. So just type in rigid body and add that in there. Now on this one, we want to leave it just as it is, but we do want to constrain all of these various things here. So just go ahead and mark every single one of those. That'll keep it from rotating when the player object hits it. Okay, so once you have that done, we need to add a script to the landing pad. So with the object selected, right click down here and hit add FSM. And before we forget, let's go ahead and just rename this FSM to landing pad. Yeah. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, like I said before, we're going to basically listen for the player to enter into this trigger volume, into this collider. When that happens, we're going to check the player's speed, and that has two results. It's either going to be too fast or it's going to be under the speed limit. So let's lay out the framework for that. So the first one is, like I said, player listener, right? And you can call it whatever you like. I like the idea of a player listener, just because it's listening for the player to collide with it. And then we're going to have a state here, which is going to be check speed. And then we either have a good result or we have the not so good result. Okay, that's basically our framework for this particular script, right? So we need some transitions to go in here. So for the player listener, I'm going to say something like, collision. And then I'm going to add that here, add transition collision, and I'm going to connect to check speed. And then check speed, I want a couple of events that are going to lead out of that, and one is going to be good, one is going to be bad. And you can call these whatever you like. I just went with good and bad, but really what you're trying to communicate to yourself is you're trying to say, hey, this speed was acceptable and this speed was not. I always went with something really, really simple. So then we want to do add transition, good, and then make sure you select up here in the highest part that where it says check speed, right click, hit add transition, bad. The reason why I want you to right click here where it says check speed, if you were to down here right click and do transition event and then do bad, see it changes exactly where you mouse over. So now we have two bad events. We don't want that. So I'm just going to mouse over that area. So if you add a transition up here on the line, right on the name check speed, then it will add it to the bottom. So now we have two transitions out of here, and that's great because we want to connect this one to good and then mouse over bad and do that to bad. Okay, that's our framework. Now let's add some events here. So for player listener, that one is trigger event. So open up your action browser, type in trigger event. Okay. Now it says use owner, and we do want to use the owner. We do care about this particular landing pad, and we want this trigger on trigger enter. We want to know when the player has entered the trigger volume. Collide tag. If you had multiple objects, for example, if we had lots of objects flying around like asteroids bouncing everywhere, we might want to use a collide tag. That way we would know specifically when a certain object lands on the pad. But we don't need that because we only have one moving object. We will know exactly who it is that is entering this collision volume. So on trigger enter, send the event collision. Oh, and just so you know, store collider, if you wanted to store whatever hit you, in this case the player, you could store that as a variable. But again, we only have one player object and one thing moving around in the scene, so we don't need to store the player object. We don't care. Okay, so that's great. We're done with that state. Now we will move into check speed. Now, what we're doing for check speed is similar to what we did with the fuel object earlier. We're basically just going to compare a float number. So let's find the float compare action again. Let's add that. Float compare. And the float that we care about is that global variable we made when we made the speed UI. We care about speed. So for our first float, we want to compare the speed variable, the global speed, right? And then we want to compare that against the number that we feel for our game, the balance is how fast can the player be moving to successfully land. Now, this is another place where you can adjust difficulty of a game. And you can play around with it to see what feels right. For me, 1 felt right. It felt pretty slow, but so it wasn't easy, but it wasn't too hard. Again, make the number higher if you want the game to be easier. Make the number lower if you want the game to be harder. So I'm going to put a 1 in there. And so if it's equal to 1, then that's good. If it's less than 1, that's also good. And if it's greater than 1, that's bad. And that is all you need to do in this particular state. That's it, because it's going to basically check that number, and then it's going to move it into to these either good or bad states. All right, so what happens when you get into the good state? Well, in the good state, it means you've won. You've landed successfully on your landing pad. So for that, all we really need to do is activate the UI. Activate game object, right? So let's activate a game object. And we don't want to activate this object. This object is already activated, so let's specify. And then up here in our UI, we have the win UI, so let's do win. We don't care about recursive, so we can uncheck that. And then over on bad, it means the player has died. So we need to do a couple things here. Let's activate a game object. We're going to specify the game object, and we're going to do the lose UI, so drag that one in there. And then also we set up an action on the player for death. We want to send an event to the player to let the player know that they are no longer alive. So we want to send event by name. Okay, let's close that down. Again, event target is not ourself, it's another game object FSM, so click that. And we're not sending it to this particular object, we're going to send it to an object that we specify. So click on that. And then drag the player object into that box. And if we set it up correctly, named it correctly, we should see death show up. And we did. And I believe our event name was called death. But let's go back and double check. Player, death, yeah, we called it death. So what will happen is, if it's going too fast, it'll send an event to the player object, and it'll send death. Let's go back over there to death. Now, since we're still in gray box mode, we don't have any art. For us, just for now, we'll add some art in the future. Let's do a couple things. First, let's disable the move keys. So we're going to go back to our action browser and enable the FSM. All right, and we do want to use the one on here. We want to disable the move ability. So disable that. Okay. And then also, when the player explodes, just kind of sell the idea that the player is gone. We're going to deactivate the art. So type in activate game object and add that one there as well. And then we don't want to turn this object off. We do want to turn off, though, an object that's attached to the player. And that's this rocket art object. So put that in there. Okay, so now the rocket object will turn off on death. When we hit that pad too fast, it'll send an action to this particular state called death. It'll first turn off the move ability so the player can no longer move around. And it'll also disable the art. that is this little rocket that I made. So let's give it a try. Before we press the play button, get back here on landing pad and let's press play. Okay, I'm going a little fast. Gonna gently bring it in. Good, you win. Okay. Now right now nothing else is happening on you win, so I can take right back off again. We'll need to fix that in a minute. And then let's try play again, and this time let's really crash it. Boom. My art disappeared, game over appeared, and okay, I see something else is wrong. I am moving, or at least my fuel remaining is still active. So we need to disable that as well. My player is not moving around, so that's good. So let's fix those things. Let's go to our player object and go to death, and then see where it says enable SFM. I'm going to highlight that one, and I'm going to Control C and Control V that, and I'm going to change move here to fuel, and I'm going to disable that as well. Now over on the Win UI, I am going to add a new script. And this one I'm going to call init. And I'm going to add another state here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a wait timer here. Wait timer. I'll leave that UI up for a second. Let's say it's 2 seconds, and then I'm going to add a transition finished. Okay, so 2 seconds, and then send the event finished. Okay, and I'm going to connect it here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new UI that is press any key to restart. So I'm going to just highlight Win UI and paste that again. And I'm going to call this replay. Let's go ahead and activate that now so we can see it. Switch back into 2D mode. Okay, so press any key to replay. And let's find a new color for that. You know, maybe like blue, maybe. Okay. So, and then let's rename this one replay, and then yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, so we'll wait 2 seconds, and then what we'll do here is we will activate a game object. Actually, I'm doing this in the wrong place. Let's not do this here. Let's just remove this FSM here. So when you're in this box, right click, remove SFM. We're going to do this on the Win UI. So on the Win UI, we're going to wait 2 seconds, and then we're going to do the action here. So weird. I don't actually remember putting a script on here. Anyway, this is basically the setup. So we're going to wait a couple seconds, then we're going to come to this particular state, and then we are going to activate that game object, which is the replay object. Maybe I haven't had enough caffeine yet. So specify game object. We are going to activate this object. Yeah, we want that checked and that unchecked. Now we want to move this object down just a wee bit. I'm sorry, not that one. Let's undo the move. Let's move replay down just a bit. Let's turn this back on so we can kind of see it there. Yeah. Okay. So here on the Win UI, we will activate replay. Let's call that activate replay. And then here we will move out of this transition and we will go to replay. Okay, but we need an action for that. So we've activated the UI element, and let's get any key, and that's the name of the action, any key. So add that to this particular state, and if any action is entered, it'll replay. So let's make a custom event for that one. We'll call that replay. Add transition replay, and then connect that here. All right, and we need to put that event here in the any key action, replay. Okay. And so then once that happens, after 2 seconds, when the UN is turned on, it will wait 2 seconds and it'll move to here. It'll activate the press any key to replay, and then it'll be listening for the user to press any button at all, and then it'll move to replay. Okay, so the action we are looking for is called restart level. Yeah, okay. So that will mean wait 2 seconds, open up the UI, wait for any button press, and then restart the level. And then let's uncheck these. Let's deactivate those because they need to start that way. And then let's do, for the Win UI, let's call this Win UI. I'll show you another little trick too. So we've created this FSM. Let's copy that and put that on the lose FSM, so because the same mechanics can work there as well. So this little gear icon on the Win UI, click on that, and there's a thing called copy component. And then come down here to lose UI, find any of these gear icons, it doesn't matter which, just any one. Left click on that, and then paste component as new. And we'll rename that to this one to lose UI. And I believe it'll work just as is because we used things like use owner. So wait 2 seconds, activate replay. Yeah, it will all work no problem on this particular one. All right, let's give that a try. Okay, going a little too fast. Boom, game over. Press any key to replay. And it reloads our scene. Okay, let's try the win condition. All right,